is.
Yeah, the handout on the order. Give those to her.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining us. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone about our meeting format. Tonight's Planning Commission meeting is being held in person and online. Commissioners, Planning Department staff, and members of the public are attending in the Wheat Ridge City Hall or by way of the Zoom platform. Members of the public who are not present and wish to make comments may participate virtually by joining through Zoom, either on a device or by calling in. A Zoom meeting link and dial-in information can be found on wheatridgespeaks.org. In addition to being online via Zoom, we are also broadcasting this meeting on Channel 8 and wheatridgespeaks.org. When it is time for public comment, those who wish to comment on our Zoom connection use the raise your hand button. If you are dialing in, press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute your phone. If you plan to speak online tonight, please keep background noise to a minimum. If you do not plan to speak, we recommend you simply view the meeting live by watching on Channel 8 or on wheatridgespeaks.org. We appreciate your participation in tonight's meeting. We hope to create a friendly and respectful atmosphere for public dialogue, and we appreciate your help in the process. I would now like to call to order the City of Wheat Ridge Planning Commission for May 16th, 2024. May I please get a roll call of the members?
Jonathan Shelkey. Christine Disney.
Here.
Daniel Gravy.
Here.
Patrick Quinn.
Here.
Will Kearns.
Here.
Michael Moore.
Here.
Sierra Quiones.
Here.
And Krista Hollub is absent tonight.
The next order on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item is approving the order of tonight's agenda. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda? I see none, so the agenda will stand as published. We don't have any minutes to approve tonight. So the next, we will now open the meeting for the general interest public forum. This is the time for any person to speak on any subject not appearing on the agenda. If you plan to speak on an item that is on tonight's agenda, please wait until we get to those items. All speakers are asked to limit their remarks to 3 minutes. Speakers may not donate their time. Is anyone signed up to speak?
Nobody at this time.
Is there anyone on Zoom?
Nobody here either.
All right, seeing that there is no one, I will close the public forum. Seeing that we don't have a public hearing tonight, and we'll go to our next item on the agenda, which is, excuse me, our training. So, without further ado, Mr. Dahl,
Well, thank
we'd
you.
love to hear from you.
I appreciate your having me, and while the mic's on, I think I'll just kind of leave it there so it's not so I'm not beyond the pain threshold. Everybody, y'all can hear me, all right, right? Okay. We really don't need the,
Oh, except Jerry, we are on Zoom. So, yeah.
I'll
Just
turn
in
it on,
case.
but I'm going to leave it kind of over there. It's one of my pet peeves, you know, you're in a small room, and there's like audio, and there's a microphone, and you know, the people that you're speaking to are like 10 feet away from you, and the person's like using the mic. I really have never understood that. Oh, well. Well, thanks very much for a second. Good, I'm glad someone else feels that way, and it's not just me. But in any event, I really appreciate your taking time out of your evening or your week to be here. And I've been the city attorney now since 1995, and during that time, it has continued to really impress me, and it's heartwarming, the citizens in this community who donate their time to this work. And it's my job, and I am paid, and but I love what I do. But nevertheless, I am paid to be here, and you aren't, The most you get is a chicken dinner, if you're lucky. And honestly, you do it for love of your community. And I'm genuine when I say I've always been impressed by that, especially in Wheat Ridge. The citizen engagement in boards and commissions in Wheat Ridge is enormous. And you've all been, or you will, to a Wheat Ridge Board and Commissions dinner or event out at the rec center, and that's heartwarming too. And it's a huge crowd of people. So I want to just, before we do anything else, thank you for the time you spend and donate for no recompense. And about half of the people that come into the room are upset with, you can't please everybody. So you can't even get the accolades from everyone because half of them are going to, not like the decision you made. And that's hard work. So thank you for doing that hard work. What I will try to do tonight, you have an outline. I'm going to kind of stick to it. Everybody got a version of that? This is an outline I've used on and off over the years with not only the Wheat Ridge Planning Commission, but others, and I keep refining it every year. But what I do want to do is cover some of the key sets of rules, I guess, that typically you'll need to follow as Planning Commission members. I want to spend a fair amount of time on, okay, what is the flow of a public hearing and what makes a good one and not? I have counted up, and now you know how old I am, so you know that I've been going to public meetings since 1976, and about 2 a week, and when you do the math, it's really a big number. And around 20 years practicing law, it was a good thing to tell people how long you had been practicing law and you're really smart and all that. And then I noticed, though, however, that after about 20 years, I mentioned when I started practicing law, and people's eyes would glaze over a little. What they were doing is math in their head. And then their eyes would clear up because they had arrived at a number which was how old I was. And, now you've arrived at that number, and I'm going to own it. But I might as well own it. There's no escaping it because my hair's white. But what I have learned as a result of all those meetings, or at least I have emerged with some real definite opinions, I guess, and suggestions about what makes a good meeting. When you think about it, a private company, we're not on the outline, but we're going to get there. A private company has a product, right? If the private company is producing water, that's its product. Cities have products too. And I feel strongly about this. The city of Wheat Ridge, it produces products in the form of parks and recreation, and in the form of the municipal court. Some people don't like having that product, but it is a product. It's the justice that's dispensed. Your product is administering the zoning code and producing decisions that end up making the development in Wheat Ridge appropriate for its location and appropriate for the neighbors. I'm telling you what you already know, but that's a product. And I believe that, local government, especially cities, their product is making people's lives better, right? And we do that in a number of ways, and it's not like a widget or a physical product, but it is nevertheless really important. And thus ends the lecture about your role or whatever. But I really, as you can tell, believe strongly in the fact that the product we produce needs to be a good one. And that's kind of our focus for tonight, is how do we generate that product in a way that people might not like the answer, but they feel that they were fairly treated. That's, Americans get it, that you lose half of the time. I understand there's a local basketball team playing tonight. I'm not, and they may win or lose, but, the key is, was it fair at least? And Americans know that they're not always going to win, but they're really frosted when they believe that they haven't been heard, or if the process wasn't fair. So, in part, I'm trying to make sure that people get the perception that the process here is fair. So, we'll get into the outline, because you're saying it's 6:45, it's yet to start on this outline, but we'll start now. Most of what the Planning Commission does, or most of the actions the Planning Commission takes, are quasi-judicial. Now we're on the outline. And you know the difference. There's quasi-judicial actions and legislative ones. Most of the time, you are sitting like judges on an application by a property owner who's applying for some kind of approval, and you're applying the rules of the code book, of the zoning code, to that application. And you're sitting as judges to judge their application against those rules. Once in a while, you'll do a legislative matter, which would be acting on a comp plan. Now it's a city plan, right? City plan, or a sub-area plan. The Lutheran Legacy Campus plan was a legislative act. So that's not quasi-judicial. You're not judges. You're acting in a legislative capacity to determine a broad set of rules or guidelines. When I come in and want to be rezoned from R1 to R2, is there R1 and R2? There is, good, excellent. I should know that after 29 years. But when I come in for that, that's quasi-judicial matter, because I'm asking you to do something specific with a specific piece of property that I have, and so you're judges. You're quasi-judges, not wearing robes. It's not that formal, but there are some rules that still apply, and here's what they are. They're on the first page here. I have the right to notice and hearing. Now, we give notices and have hearing on legislative matters, but it's a lot less formal. I've got the right to present witnesses and evidence. I've got the right to make a legal argument, drag my lawyer in and have him or her address you. Importantly, I have the right to have you act on it without having any ex parte contacts, any contacts outside of the hearing room. And that's not true for legislation, is it? For legislation, people can buttonhole you in the grocery store aisle and bend your ear forever on the Lutheran Legacy Campus plan, and that's perfectly fine. For 6 years, I was the general counsel for the Colorado Municipal League, and one of the jobs of that job is to lobby bills of the legislature. So I lobbied, and you actually do it in the lobby, oddly enough, at the legislature, and it's like trying to communicate with someone at a cocktail party, because it's just the noise. But the point is that that's truly ex parte, isn't it? There's no hearing room. You're just bending their ear. And you can do that because it's legislation. That's all the legislature does. It doesn't do any quasi-judicial work. It's all legislative work. But you mostly do quasi-judicial work, which means that you're restricted from having ex parte contacts, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Overall, the right that an applicant has is the right to an impartial decision maker, that you bring as much as you can an open mind to the hearing. I live in the real world. We all do. You know what that, you understand the history of, and you're aware of the history of property at 44th and Kipling. You just are, because it's a small enough community. You're aware of it. And you can't not bring the sum total of your experience in your life here to that. But there's a difference between bringing your experiences into the room and bringing a preconceived decision into the room. And judges do this all the time. I think it's probably second nature to them. I really do. I think that, judges in a small community, they know people, but for whatever reason, they're able to kind of turn a little switch when they sit up there and just listen to the evidence. And they have experience that helps them make decisions, but they make the decision on defendant X on the basis of the evidence that's presented that day, because that defendant has a right to an impartial decision maker. We all know that. So these are the main things that applicant can expect. One of the key roadblocks or obstacles, I think, or problems, especially in small communities, ex parte contacts, because people know you, and they will trap you in the vegetable aisle or wherever they trap you, at Apple or someplace, if they do know you, and they potentially will want to vent your ear about their application that's coming up. And it might not be the applicant, more likely it's an opponent, it might be the neighbors, right, who are not happy about the fact that a property that's been zoned R2 forever is now getting platted. That's a classic. It's been a grassy field, and the zoning was already in place, so we know that that horse has left the barn. But the neighbors don't fully appreciate that, and really your only job is to look at the subdivision application, and we're changing those rules too, aren't we? We're moving that down. But the point is, they see you, and in their brains, they're not violating any laws by talking to you about that application. And I don't fault them for that at all, because that is their perception. You're in the government, and there's this hearing, they want to talk to you. But of course, that's an ex parte contact. And the applicant is not in the room. They're not in the grocery aisle with you. Neither are the other neighbors, neither is the staff, neither are the other members of the commission. So it's a true ex parte contact. And if I sell my car to Jana, and it is a bad car, in her view it is, and Christine is the judge, and Jana sees me taking Christine out to lunch, we would all agree that you can't do that. Christine's never going to go to lunch with one of the litigants in a lawsuit that she's going to have to hear. The same thing's true. And I don't think we understand it here, and I'm telling you here. The general public doesn't, and I don't fault them for that. So you don't beat them up. And so the real question is, that's an ex parte contact. Why should you avoid it? Now I'll start going through the outline. Why should you avoid it? Well, judges can't talk to parties outside the courtroom. The consequence of that, and I've had it happen a few times in my practice where someone said, I had this long conversation with so-and-so, I didn't realize that I couldn't do that. So I've had to advise, okay, you're going to have to disclose that and step down from the decision on this case. You can't vote on it. There was one litigated case where they didn't step down, they voted anyhow. And on appeal, the decision of the commission was overturned because that's a fatal defect. And we'll talk about the range of ex parte contacts in a minute. Well, how can you avoid it? I've said, advise them that it's, as commission member, it's improper, and urge them to bring their points of view to the hearing. And, how far does that get you? But Dahl has three other tricks. The first one is this is a quasi-judicial matter, and, that just goes over their head. And so you say, well, you apply to self-interest. If I listen to you here, I'm not going to be able to vote. And they're talking to you because they want you to vote one way or another, right? So you say, if I'm listening to you, I'm not going to be able to vote, and that's how. Door number 3, and there's a fourth door, but door number 3 is, well, I don't fully understand it, but the city attorney says I can't. And I'm not giving you that excuse to elevate my own importance. It's just sometimes that works for people. It's like this King's X. I'm all about results, and use me if it's handy, and don't use me if you think it won't be handy. But that's another trick up your sleeve. And door 4 is, you say, I'm sorry, I think I hear my wife calling me from the vegetable aisle, and I've got to get out of here. So whatever it takes, just get out of Dodge. Well, what do you do if it's happened? Because you don't know that somebody's going to talk to you about the application 44th and Kipling until, that's an intersect. Until they actually tell you, I'm here to talk to you about the application 44th and Kipling, and I hate it. Are you out of luck all of a sudden just because of that? Well, of course not. That's a contact that's really very minor, and you can do at the beginning of the hearing, and I've done this any number of times, you talk to the chair ahead of time and say, Christine, when we open this hearing, would you mind deferring to me or asking me if I've got let's say it's you, Will, and you've had a conversation with someone, but it was really brief, and you just alert Christine before the meeting starts. Hi, I have this conversation, I need to make a disclosure right at the beginning of the hearing. It needs to be at the beginning so that we can make a little record. And that record's easy. She says, okay, I'm going to call to order the hearing in the XYZ case. I first want to recognize Commissioner Kearns as a disclosure. And you say, I want you to know that I spoke with Jana Easley, a citizen, at the store who was opposed to this application. I told her that I couldn't listen further and she should come to the hearing. It doesn't matter if she's here or not. What matters is you've said that and you've made a record of that. And that's the sum total of the conversation, and then you go on. Yeah. No, because you put a Band-Aid on it, that's perfectly fine. It was a 2-minute conversation. That doesn't, if we allowed 2-minute conversations to have people have to step down, happy it'd be, we'd have real trouble. And so that is the Band-Aid you put on when you have these minor contacts, because you've used one of Dahl's tricks to get out of the conversation. But you didn't know to use the trick until you knew, if that's like the catch-22, but that's the solution for that. If you actually did have some kind of contact, you disclose that contact. Now everyone's heard it. Everyone's heard that Jana Easley doesn't like this application. And we're all on the same page, and that's due process fairness to the applicant. We're doing this all so that it's fair to the applicant, who was not there when Jana buttonholed Will. But now everyone knows, including the applicant, that Jana's opposed, but that's all. If instead Jana took Will to lunch to lobby Will, like I used to lobby legislators, and I was at CML, I'd take him to the Quorum Restaurant, which isn't there, across the street from the Capitol. Then what Will's going to have to do is have the same conversation with you and say, can you recognize me at the beginning? She recognizes Will at the beginning, and Will says, I have to tell the commission that I had lunch and was, lobbied extensively by one of the opponents here, and I'm going to have to recuse and step down. And he does. He leaves the room. We're good. 99 times out of 100, it's the little Band-Aid, or even not that, because you were lucky enough, nobody talked to you. Maybe you got an email. That's not a problem. You forward those emails to Tammy, and she will copy them out and send them to the whole group. You got a phone call. That doesn't happen much anymore. 20 years ago when I gave this talk, it was all phone calls that people were getting. Now it's mostly emails. But forward those to staff. They can be shared. Everyone's on the same page. It's not a problem. I hear your question. What I'm suggesting is just be sensitive to it and aware of the fact that, don't get into conversations with people on applications. Tell them, here's one of the tricks, say Dahl says you can't, and urge they come to the hearing and tell them the date, time, and place. If it's a short conversation, you make the little disclosure, you're good. I will tell you this, even if you don't make the disclosure, if it is that shorter conversation, it's going to be fine. I don't mean to unnecessarily complicate the process that the chair here has to undertake. But that's how to do it. I see Christine's question. And I'll tell you, if you've ever got a question about, gee, I'm just not sure if that was an improper contact or what do I do, that's when you email or call me or have the staff call me. On the council level, any number of times now, I've had to take the council member through a little Q&A. Hi, the council member says, I had this, is it true you had this conversation? Yes. How long was the conversation? 2 minutes. What did the person say? They said they liked the application. Did you tell them to show up at the hearing? Yes or no or whatever. Do you believe you can, despite this short conversation, bring a fair mind, impartial mind to the application? Yes. Thank you very much. We'll go on. So if there's a need, if you're more concerned about what happened, call me, and I'll either say, no, you're good, just do the one Band-Aid, or I'll zoom into the meeting for the purpose of doing that little Q&A. That's my job. I'm here to make sure that works. Questions? It's Christine first. Yes, just for that matter. No. Yeah. Leaves the room. You bring him back. Yep. Uh, yeah. Yeah. I advise against that, and here's why. Uh, there's always someone in the room that thinks that you were, giving handsets, or that your mere presence is an effect. At the governing body level, there's a statute that says when you do have a conflict of interest, and I was at the legislature and lobbied this bill, actually. If you do have a conflict of interest, if you're a member of the governing body, city council, you shall disclose the conflict and shall, quote, refrain from, right out of the statute, refrain from attempting to influence the other members of the governing body on the matter. Well, what in the dickens does that mean? And I asked Senator whoever that put that on the bill in the committee, how are we going to comply with this? And Senator whatever did not have a good answer for that. But it's in the law now. It doesn't apply to commissions, but it's a good rule. And I uniformly advise that if there's a declared conflict where you're not going to be able to participate, you do that right at the beginning of the hearing, so you're not there influencing and then you leave. I've seen someone do that, all the way through the hearing, and then they leave. Wait a minute, come on. You get up and leave the room, because no one can say if you were not in the room that you were trying to influence the other members. For years, I did special counsel work for the city of Steamboat Springs, and in that era, the mayor worked for the ski area, and about every third item on the city council's agenda in that era had to do with the ski area. And so they get to that item on the agenda, and everyone would look at the mayor and you go, no, I know. And he'd get up and he'd hand the gavel to the mayor pro tem, and he'd leave the room. They'd do the item per your question, and when they were done, someone would be sent out to grab the mayor and bring him back in. And there was never a question in Steamboat Springs about whether they were playing fair, because the mayor wasn't in the room. The amount of time you spend defending why you could stay in the room, I guarantee you, will dwarf the amount of time it takes for you to leave the room. Leave the room, go get a candy bar, get coffee, give yourself, take the break, for goodness sake. So that's my advice, when someone offers you a gift, you should take it. So that's the trick. Yeah. Did you? No? Okay. In any event, that's how you just really ice that. I have had people say, well, can I just sit there? Really? Again, the amount of time you spend saying why it's okay to sit there will dwarf the amount of time you spend just leaving the room. Then there's no question. Then you're done. So we're on to the second page of about a 4-page outline, so we're good. We've kind of covered this top of the second page, which is, the right to an impartial decision maker. That is what that applicant gets. You refrain, and one thing that I advise is you refrain from signaling your opinion before the testimony is complete. How would you feel, in this case where Christine's the judge and Jana's suing me? How would Jana feel if in questions of witnesses or whatever, or early stage, I haven't even put on my case yet. It's halfway through the beginning of Jana's case, and the judge says, well, I just don't see that there's any defect in this car. We haven't even heard all the witnesses yet. We're not done with the trial, and the judge is signaling that. I had I think it was a city council member, I don't think it was here, that did two things. On one case, he said, well, very beginning, we had the staff presentation. I think it was before the applicant's presentation. Well, I need everybody to know that I'm a no vote on this. Really? This was a fairly new council member, I think, and they kind of hadn't gotten the memo yet, but really? That's pretty extreme, but more often, I've had commission and council members clearly in asking questions early in the hearing, voices dripping with sarcasm, how they feel. And that's not an impartial decision maker, and that's just not fair. I've been in any number of actual trials, and I always am amazed at how you just don't have a clue where the judge is coming from, because they are just like a sphinx. They just, even when they have to interact with the parties, you're trying to read the tea leaves, and it's hard. It should be that way. And it's easy to do. It's so much easier not to signal just keep keep a straight face. I live in the real world, and I know that halfway through the hearing, you probably have an opinion about where you're going to head. But save it. This one council member talking about, for whatever reason, thought he had to fire that bullet early or he'd lose it. But no, you're the last vote. You're the last, you don't have to worry about the opportunity to fire the bullet will not be lost because you'll get to vote. So just save it. That's how to not signal how you feel. I've said don't attend and speak on an application at other meetings. If there's a neighborhood meeting and you know it's here and you know it's going to come to you as a planning commission member, I would not go to that neighborhood meeting. I often get council members or planning commission members saying to me, well, do I give up my First Amendment rights to go to these meetings just because I'm on the commission? When I was a much younger attorney, I tried to figure out how to tell them they didn't. But I'm not young anymore. And the answer is yes, you do. You made a deal when you said that you took the oath and you would be on the commission. You made a deal to be an impartial decision maker. And part of that is not trying to influence or be influenced outside the hearing room on this case. The judge would never go to some neighborhood meeting if you had one in this car trial that Jan and I are going. Of course not. And yes, you have First Amendment rights, but you traded a limited amount of those for a much better deal, which is the ability to actually vote on it and decide the case, as opposed to just attend a meeting and speak. And it's a true thing, and it's a hard message sometimes for people to understand because they want to be able to have their cake and eat it too. Go to this meeting and say how they feel personally, and then sit up here and be an impartial decision maker. You cannot have both things, but the power you have as a result of being a commissioner is much greater than any influence you'd have at some neighborhood meeting just as a citizen. So you made that bargain. I think it's a good one. If you don't like that bargain, then there will come a time when your term ends and you go, okay, I'd rather be out there. And that's cool too. That's an important role in our community, but you have made a choice when you end up on the commission. Yeah. Yeah. I would not emphasize it by addressing it, and here's why. That just shines a spotlight on the defect. And in the end, whatever decision the commission makes, if it goes up on appeal, they sometimes do in Wheat Ridge, the record's going to be the record. That person already did that. The fact that there's a point of order just kind of points it out to opposing counsel when they try to bring an action to challenge that, and I'm going to have to deal with it one way or another. The records that I have to, by a record, I mean the record that you make in a hearing, that's what a reviewing judge, judges the case on, is the record made in front of you. And every record's got freckles on it. None of them are perfect, but that one instance probably isn't going to make it such that we're going to lose the case. But I appreciate your question, but it's kind of too late by then, so I wouldn't emphasize it and point it out, because it's already happened. Water under the bridge, we move on. So, conducting public hearings. For this purpose, first, I'd like Dan and I spent time in the last couple of days kind of organizing a little bit the order of a public hearing. And I know that the chair has a script. We reworked the script a little to reflect just a little bit of fine-tuning, if you will, of the order of events in public hearing. And this is the order that largely the city council follows, and I want to go through it, and then we'll go back to my outline. But this is largely what you do, but I wanted to point out some things. And the council does this: you open public hearing, you first hear from the staff, then you hear from the applicant. At council, the mayor is always very good after the staff and after the applicant presentation, saying, thank you very much. Don't go far away. We'll have time for questions for you after the public has testified. He always says that. And that's what we'd like to do here. And there's a reason for that, and I'll keep going. So then you open the public forum and hear from the citizens and whoever signed up to testify. Once you've closed that public testimony, then back to the applicant for any kind of rebuttal or wrap-up. And that's fair. Often the room will feel that it's not. If a bunch of people have shown up to oppose this rezoning, they will feel the applicant's getting 2 bites. They only got 1. But they're the applicant. Honestly, if they were a plaintiff in a trial, they'd get 2 bites, because they would get a rebuttal. They would. And honestly, it's only fair, because this is the land use applicant who has the right to respond to all the stuff that they've heard from the public. You need to give them the opportunity to do that, and that's why it's there. Then questions by a commission of the applicant or the staff, because, and I'll talk in a minute about how you handle questions that crop up in the meanwhile. But the council does this, and the mayor's really pretty good about saying when the council's kind of learned it too. The mayor runs a pretty tight ship, you probably know. The council's good about holding their questions. Once in a while, a new council member will have a question, and the mayor will say, we're going to hold those questions and we'll get to them. You might ask, well, what about when the public is speaking? They don't have that memo, you know? And it happens frequently here where a member of the public will say, well, I have a question, the applicant, which is the setback over, are you going to take the cottonwood tree down or not? And the mayor is really good about, and I will urge you, and I'll urge the chair here to say, thank you. We're going to you need to direct your questions to the commission. We won't be answering them, but we're going to ask the applicant or staff to answer that question and any others. That way, what you don't have is some kind of dialogue all of a sudden in the middle of public testimony. Now we're negotiating the deal. And if you let it go, what happens is the applicant says, well, you know, we can keep this tree, but not that one. And the public says, well, gee, how about the other one? And I've been in meetings where all of a sudden it's, why am I here? Looks like it's just that member of the public and the applicant, they're redesigning the application in the middle of a public hearing. And it's just, I'm not saying the question isn't valid. I'm not saying it shouldn't be answered. It absolutely should, but there's time and a place. And you don't want the hearing to then all of a sudden become derailed into a Q&A. Not trying to hide the question, not trying to hide the answer, but there's a spot for it. And you tell people that. If you tell them, sorry, no questions, Americans don't like that. But if you tell them, thank you, we're making a note of that, and I'm going to ask the applicant or the staff to address that after we have concluded the public testimony. And I've observed that people that come here all loaded for bear, and they really want the applicant to answer because they think they're going to just skewer the applicant. They're F. Lee Bailey. They are going to, and they're ready. They don't like it that they're not getting that answer right away, but they accept the rule as long as they're told. We've made a note of that. I'm going to ask the applicant, as the chair speaks. I'm going to ask the applicant to address that after the public testimony. Who's next? And you just keep going. So that's, and you know, over time, you'll see it happen. The chair will have that opportunity to have to, you know, catch one of those grounders, but that's what we'd like to have. Sometimes the question is better one for staff, sometimes it's better one for the applicant, but the applicant and staff are here, and they will know, just sitting there, who's going to answer that one. You know, and so when you get to, after the applicant has wrapped up, quite likely they'll address it, but if they haven't, you've got questions by the commission of applicant or staff. And those questions can be your own, or they can replicate a question from the public. You know, Commissioner Quinn can say, you know, I heard, you know, Betty, you know, I heard Phyllis or Kermit, my parents' names. I always use them because they're not going to be offended. I heard Phyllis or Kermit ask this question. Yes, indeed, my parents' names are Phyllis and Kermit. Who knew? But I heard Kermit ask a question. He had a Kermit the Frog in his. There you go. You know, Kermit was the son of Teddy Roosevelt. Kermit Roosevelt. There you go. But in any event, I heard Kermit ask this question. See, now you'll never forget this because of the name. I heard Kermit ask this question. I didn't hear it answered, can you get an answer? Because that's your spot, questions by the commission of applicant and staff. And that's when you can really drill down. And if you've got questions unrelated to the ones that came up, but you've got your own questions, because you always do, or often do, that's the time to do it. I urge that that's when it happened rather than peppered through the middle of an applicant presentation, the middle of a staff presentation, part of a dialogue with a member of the public that's testifying. Just make sure everyone knows you're not avoiding it. You will absolutely get to that question. And after a while, people will go, okay, I get it. But then you have to fulfill the promise. You promised them that you would ask that question. Make notes, because you do not want, okay, the applicant and staff will deal with that, and it turns out they never did. The person's sitting back there in the third row steaming because they remember their questions, the most important thing to them the whole hearing, and it got forgotten. So somebody needs to make a note of that. Now, 9 times out of 10, the staff of the applicant will. But, it's partly your job, too, to keep me and the staff and the applicant honest and make us answer the question. So when we're done with that, close the public hearing. Then we're just into commission discussion, and there's no more public testimony, there's no more applicant testimony. Once in a while, there might be a question of the staff if you're halfway through the motion. Okay, I want to do this motion, but there's this condition. I take the position that that's staff helping you do your action, which is not the same as, the staff presentation. And you can always, sadly, the city attorney can always be asked questions, and you can get him or her to always participate. And it's the rules. I'm not saying the rules don't apply to me, but you can always take the advice of the city attorney at any stage of the case. Did you have a question? No. You did? Okay. All right. Anyhow, that's the flow of the hearing. So with that in mind, let's take a look at conducting public hearings back on the main outline. Now you've kind of heard my whole story, really, when I say that the goals that people leave the hearing feeling it was fair. In a sense, you've already heard what I think about that, don't you? And you've heard in how to make that happen. Because that's, again, the product is not only making people's lives better, but making people feel as if this public process was fair, even if they lost. So these suggested rules mostly for the chair. If there are rules ahead, you announce the rules at the beginning. And it might be helpful. It kind of depends upon who's in the room and how the room's really full. I've had chairs say, I want everyone to know how we're going to do this tonight, or what the order of things is. Because there are people back there that haven't been here before. They're worried they might not get a chance to speak. And so they're raising their hand in the applicant presentation or whatever. And it's been really effective. I've had mayors do this to say, we're going to hear from the staff, then the applicant, then we're going to hear from you, then we're going to close public testimony. But if you have questions, we'll save them, make the applicant and staff answer them. Then the applicant will get to stand up again. Then we're going to have questions of the applicant and staff, and then I'm going to close the public hearing. We're going to deliberate. And then if I'm sitting back there with my script that I worked on last night, I know that I know my spot's coming up, and I'm not upset. It's a pretty, what's the right word? A pretty engaged public that we have here, and most of them kind of know the drill, but there are people that, for them, it's the first time, the only time they will ever be in this building. And their impression of the government of the city of Wheat Ridge is wholly dependent upon how you behave. I had a judge once, I think it was Judge Randall actually, say, many of the defendants I see I'm never going to see again. And their only impression of the city of Wheat Ridge as a city, it's 200 employees, is the 15 minutes that I have with them. So I'm careful, not to blow it, And so I, bear that in mind. As you can tell, all I ever have done is represent the public, and I feel very strongly that the product, their rights are so important that it's important that we get kind of, I won't say lazy, but you've been sitting there. I've been in these 4,000 meetings, whatever, when you do the math, and you can't. I think it's important for them to believe that they're the most important thing in that hearing. In any event,
Jerry, I do have a quick
Yeah.
question. We ran into an issue where someone ran out of time at one of our hearings. And I was curious. Yeah, a member of the
Yeah,
public, right.
good.
And there was some time that was eaten up by some Q and A. It
Yep.
might have violated and been with the applicant, or it may have been with commission, I don't recall. But it seemed to me that that time shouldn't have counted towards them. And then kind of in a larger question, can the chair just say, you know, I mean, the time's been notified, the time's up, but the chair just say, all right, go ahead, finish up.
Yes, and I'm delighted you asked that question because Jan and I spent some time on that very issue. She related to me that that had happened. And I'll tell you this, what we're going to do is abolish the 3-minute rule for citizen testimony on cases. Because that rule doesn't exist at the council level at all. Council has a 3-minute rule for public's right to speak on matters not on the agenda. You know, the open mic section, you got an open mic section in yours. And there's a 3-minute limit on that because goodness knows what can happen. And with an election, we'll get Zoom bombed like, you know, the council did last November. So it's fair to have that when there have been in a quasi-judicial hearing. You let the council never imposes a limit. And that's a change we're going to make. I'm glad you raised the question, and we want to make sure that Christine knew. We just will not be keeping track of time. Now, if there's 30 people in the room, and they're all signed up on this case, then at the beginning, you do a little math and you go, okay, 3 minutes apiece times 30, okay, that's 90 minutes, we can do that. You announce and say, for this hearing, because of so many people, I'm the chair, I'm going to impose a 3-minute rule, and we're going to keep track. That's going to happen once every 99 times. And I've yet to see a public speaker on a rezoning quasi-judicial case in front of the council really abuse the no time limit rule, because they're not even told there's a rule, they just present. And I've really yet to see someone really abuse that. You know, they come with their statement. So the most I would do, Chair, would be if someone's really kind of already covered it and now they're about to plow the ground again, as people will sometimes do, it's fair to say, you know, if it's Jerry Dahl, Mr. Dahl, can you wrap up? I think we've heard your testimony. Can you wrap up? And, you know, that's how to handle that. And that avoids this, okay, your time's up, or what if half of it was Q&A, or half of it was questions from the commission, and that leads me to say that you're not doing questions from the commission to the speakers while they're speaking anyhow, right? Because if you've got a question of that person, that's another good example here. Can I, as a commission member, start asking questions of the members of the public? I get to ask questions of the applicant and staff later. It's on your list here, Gary. Whereas I get to ask questions of the public speakers. I advise not, because that, I think, really invites a Q&A that they're not ready for. But you still might have a question on that topic, and here's how I would advise you deal with it. Turn that into a question for the staff of the applicant. And you can say, you know, when Kermit was testifying, he had, you know, and can you address what, you know, so much of the time you'll be able to rephrase a question you're going to ask Kermit and ask it of the applicant and staff later. That's a trick I would use, because the more dialogue you have with the citizens, then they're really confused about whether, well, can we do this or not? What's going on? If I can't, you know, if my questions are being reserved to the end, why the heck do I, you know what? So that's the trick I would use. Now, I'm sure the next couple of hearings, you'll have an opportunity to apply some of this. We'll get halfway to the goal line. There'll be some problems, and that's okay. That's how you learn. But that's what we're going to do. No more 3-minute rule on speakers and on cases. 3-minute rule for those open mic at the beginning. And then you can use the lights. And do you guys use the lights? Mm-hmm. You do? Okay. Those are great. All right. So anyhow, suggested rules. I've said if a large number sign up, divide their time and do it at the beginning. You can always suggest the speakers don't repeat their prior testimony, and they always will. Always, you know? And it used to bother me, but here's my view. People, they know they're saying almost the same thing as the prior speaker, but it's them saying it not the prior speaker. And they really believe, and I agree with them, that that's important to them. It's important that that you hear it from them. It's the same words, but doggone it, it's not the same person. And don't dare, treat me as if I'm a clone of the person in front of me, even if I'm saying the same thing. And I think that's why I've gotten a lot more patient. I guess I've gotten more impatient and more patient, as time goes on, but I'm a lot more patient now with people that, want to repeat things, because that's their time. You said it was their time, and you don't take it away from them. I've said, direct the testimony to the commission, not to the staff or the applicant, and just be ready to kind of deflect that. You want to honor the fact they're asking a question. And you say, we're going to ask the applicant or staff to answer that question. We're not going to answer it now. But I promise you, says the chair, we'll note it down. We'll make the staff and the applicant address that. People are usually fine with that. Make sure everybody knows they have the right to speak. Give them your full attention. When I was lobbying, I had legislators that would sit there reading the newspaper while one of their constituents, from Sterling, had driven all the way in to testify for 2 minutes, and they weren't paying attention, and I was enormously offended by that. I really was, and I was just a lobbyist. I can't imagine how this person felt who drove 3 hours in, 3 hours back, and did not get listened to. So, you give them your full attention, and that means, you turn off the cell phone, because as you should. And you thank the speakers for appearing. I had a chair of a Senate committee that he never voted with the Municipal League ever in his life. His name was Jim Brandon. He's a good guy, but he never voted with the Municipal League. But he always thanked the speakers, and it was earnest. And that impressed me more than the thank yous I got from legislators that were going to vote, because I still remember it all these years. So thanking someone for appearing and making it genuine is important. So what testimony is admissible? Pretty much anything. This is quasi-judicial, not judicial. So there's no rules of evidence. I've never really come up here. Nobody said, well, that's hearsay. Because what hearsay is, when I say, Jana told me this, she's not here, right? Which we're pretending she's not here. And she said this, that's hearsay. And in a regular trial, it's not admissible. It's admissible here. But you give a little less weight. Why? Because you didn't hear it from her. You heard it from me, and I might well have changed. If we've heard one elected official say the following thing, I got a lot of calls from my constituents saying exactly this. And I kind of wonder, number one, how many calls? And number two, did they really say exactly that? That's hearsay. And you give it less weight than if that person's in the room talking to you. So that's why you can consider the weight of the testimony. I'm on to the next page. You consider all the testimony. It's tough, especially when the room fills up, and it's 90-1 in favor of, you got 30 people, and 25 of them are saying vote no. And, but you're not an applausometer. Hands up, everyone knows what that is. One guy, come on, Jonathan, don't pretend you don't know what the applausometer is. The old TV game show where the audience, if they're going to vote for contestant number 3, they applauded, and there was actually a little meter with like a dial. And whoever got the most applause when the dial was the furthest over won the washing machine. Do I have to update that joke? I guess I do. Anyhow, but the point is, you are not an applausometer, right? And neither is the audience. And so, but they will pressure you and say, everybody here hates this, so you've got to say no. Well, the people that aren't there are people you represent as well. They just aren't in the room, and you represent everybody in the community, so there's that. The applicant's got the right to make a full presentation, present witnesses, and to respond after public comment closes. Taking action. Well, as the case law says, you've got to draw your conclusions from the evidence made in the hearing. That's what a judge would do. Typically, you've got a staff report that does that for you, right? And that says, based upon the application, et cetera, this is a recommended action. But, it's only recommended, and I stress that. The staff will make the recommendation, but but you're the ones that decide. And very often, the council on a staff recommendation may not take it, or they may take it and change it and add conditions, and that's absolutely your job. But your job is also to make sure it complies with the code, not whether you personally would like to see a 3-story apartment building there. You know, if that's allowed by the code and they have satisfied the code requirements, you know, unless there's some evidence in the record to the contrary, that gets approved. And the applicant's in charge of their application. I've seen commissions try to say, well, if you just move this building over here and that to the side and the trail here, then we can do this. You know, you're not the applicant. They're in charge of their ship. If you don't like their ship and there's a reason to say no based upon the fact the buildings are in the wrong place, then just say no, rather than trying to revise their application for them. Now, there's a little room for that because, you know, it comes up in the hearing and the applicant says, well, I think I could do this. If the applicant's going to volunteer a condition, you can make that a part of your decision. But avoid taking on the role of being their assistant, you know, drafter. And because they're grown-ups, they made a decision the building is going to go there, and they're taking a risk. You're not going to like it. That's their problem, and it's not your problem to solve. So there's that. You've got the staff proposed motions. You can always add to them with conditions. You can change them. You can take the reverse motion. Amendments really need to be germane, as I say, germane to the main motion. It's a good way, in a tricky case, one trick that I have seen used is, okay, we've got 3 potential conditions, but the commission isn't all together on those. The 3 of you like condition 1, but 1 doesn't. On condition 2, it's a different set. And on condition, so if you make a motion to approve with all 3 conditions, each one of you has a reason to say yes and to say no. So one trick, and it's a good one, is to say, okay, and the chair can do this. I'm going to take a motion to approve the application, just without any, to approve the application. Then before we vote on that, I'm going to ask for amendments. And I've seen committees at the State House do this. It's really effective. The chair would say, okay, the bill's on the table, and the sponsor will, the sponsoring senator will say, I move the bill. And then the chair will say, okay, amendments? And Senator X will say, I move to amend to strike line 3, page 2, and they vote on that amendment. And if that amendment passes, it's on the motion, because what we're doing, we put up a Christmas tree without any ornaments, right? That's the motion. And then the amendments add the ornaments. And some ornaments get added and some don't, depending upon, you know, the votes. That's fine. Any other amendments, says the chair? No, no other amendments. Okay, now we're voting on the motion as amended, with the 3 ornaments that got on and without the 2 that didn't. And that's a way to allow you really to be able to vote on to your heart on each of those. Otherwise, you're conflicted. Well, I would vote yes, but I don't like this piece of it, right? And so that's how you can kind of chop it up a little. And you can always take a recess after the hearing if it looks tricky. You can take a recess. The chair can confer with staff to say, how do we navigate all the conditions here? And you can take a recess with staff and say, okay, well, here's the 3 conditions. Why don't we propose them individually? And then you can see where the chips fall on that. And then it allows you to get your work done in a reasonable way.
So, so you're saying we would vote on individual conditions?
Yeah, because there are amendments to the motion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to have a Christmas tree to hang them on. So the first motion is, I move to approve the application. But the chair is really clear in saying, we're not going to vote on that. We're going to take that motion. It's going to get second. Now it's a pending motion. It's not yet been voted on. Any motion that's pending can be amended by another motion. So I move to amend the motion by adding a setback condition as follows. Okay, is there a second to that? Fine. Any debate on that amendment? Let's vote on the amendment. Chair is always clear to say we're voting on the amendment. Sometimes people think, wait, are we voting on the main motion? No, we're voting on the amendment. Okay, any other amendments? When we're done hanging ornaments, then, okay, now we'll vote on the motion as amended if any of the amendments got on. None of them got on, you're back to the main motion. So a couple of times through, and it'll be obvious that it's an easy system. Once you've done it once or twice, it'll be intuitive.
Historically, if a commissioner, has an idea for a condition on something, do they express that to staff ahead of the meeting and say, I would rather see it this way? Is that, I know it's kind of like however you want to be effective.
Yeah. You always have the right to talk to staff. I'll tell you, talking to staff ahead of the meeting is not an ex parte contact, because they're your staff. It's like the judge's law clerk. They can always talk in private outside of the trial, and that's okay. So you can always talk to staff. Once you get the staff report in the packet, yes, you can do that, or you can just save it for the hearing. Either way. Staff can probably help you on that condition. If you really feel strongly about it, they can help you and say, when the time comes, you're welcome to, here's how I would articulate a setback condition. I would ask you, and I'll be curious how Jana and the others feel here. I'd encourage you not to say, well, staff has said that I can do this condition. And people have done that to me, where they've called me up, a council member in not this city, called me up and said, well, what about this and this? And I explained to him what I thought. And then, doggone it, in the council meeting, he says, well, the city attorney urges that we do this, because I talked to him. That only happens to you once as the attorney of the staff, and you're not going to be that helpful to that person next time around. So don't throw them under the bus in that way, or try to use them. But I'm not ascribing bad motives to you. Just, they can help you articulate what your condition might be. But then it's yours, not theirs. Yeah. She's next. Sure. Yeah, yeah. And you do that when you're in action mode. And on this little list here, that would be after the chair closes the public hearing. You're down to the last bullet, motion, discussion on motion, vote. And it's really motions if there's going to be amendments, but that is when. Yeah. Yeah.
Next question. I think on the next page, there's a list of perhaps not acceptable conditions or amendments. So I would keep that in mind as well. Like, if we're rezoning to something, you can't just add, well, I don't like that it's a 5-foot setback, so we're going to make it a 30-foot setback. Something kind of there are some parameters, I would say, for adding amendments.
That's good.
And the other thing I would add really quickly is you can, when you're asking questions of the applicant and staff, you could ask the applicant, would you be willing to? And at that point, you might get a read on it. Do you disagree with that?
No, that's fine, as long as the applicant says yes to a condition that you couldn't otherwise impose. The applicant has to consent.
Right.
But, yeah.
Does that make sense?
That would be at the applicant presentation at the beginning.
It'd be questions by commission of applicant or staff. Third bullet from the bottom.
Gotcha.
Again, remembering, we're trying to let the applicant just give their presentation. And we're curiously making notes saying, okay, I'm gonna trap them on this, this, and this, when it's my turn to trap them. And so there's that. All right, let's see here. We're almost done, I promise. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in that zone district. Not, and the reason being, the code, that their application is measured against the code. Code allows 50 feet. And they're proposing a building of 40 that the room and the audience hates that, and every one of them said, 2 stories, not 3. We've heard that in this room any number, we've heard that a million times. It's always the difference between 2 and 3 stories, isn't it? Here. And I get it, it's a bigger impact, but if the code allows it, they're coloring within the lines. And the most, I suppose you could say as a question of the applicant, would you object to reducing, I'll tell you, that's a condition. They're not gonna, that's, if you're gonna move a tree around, if you're gonna, stuff like that, but changing the dimensions of a property that they have a right to apply for. Instead of trying to do that, you know, in the end, perhaps you vote no on the application because you don't, but to try to do an amendment, what that has you doing is really revising their application and by condition. And I would. Yeah. If it meets the standards of that zone district, that's what they're applying for. You know, and there are cases where you think it might not meet the standards because the standards, you know, some of the standards are really objective, you know, 40 feet, whatever. But others are a little more subjective, and that's part of the place where you have some room. Let's see here. Did I? Okay, great. Well, anyhow, let's go to the page, top of page 4, grounds for denial. Yeah. I have. Still something on 3? Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh, yeah. Yeah. What do you, yeah. At some point, I think that you can, as the chair. And I'm glad you asked the right question and in the right way. It's sort of, you're not such a cop that you're, because that would turn the process on its head. Point of order, and you can't say that, you know, you're not going to do that. So there's some give in the system here. But if that commission is really pushing that, and it becomes sort of how we're now going to decide this application, then I think it's fair to say, you know, Commissioner Kearns, I have to tell you, you're welcome to have your opinion because we don't, you know, you don't censor opinions. You're welcome to have your opinion, but I have to tell you that that's really outside the scope of the nature of this application. This is a rezoning application. We're not doing site planning here. And Commissioner Kearns can either pick up on that or not, but you made that point, and at some point you say, okay, we're going to move on to questions from other commissioners. And he might hang in there, and that's his right to do it. He probably will hang in there. But that's, yeah. Well, Madam Mayor, I think, you know, but we're a heterogeneous, not a homogeneous group. You know, everyone's got the right to be a little unique, and in the end, there's what, 7 of you or 8, and it happens all the time. The vote is on council 5-3. When I was first hired, there was no vote that was any better than 5-3. Most of them are 4-4, and the mayor had to break the tie. It's not true anymore, but it was true in the 90s. And that's okay. The work of the city got done. The motions don't have to be unanimous. There are people that can be wrong-headed, Commissioner Kearns. And that's okay. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't, it's not fatal to the process as long as we're respectful. I hear you, Commissioner Kearns, I fundamentally don't agree. And we'll see how the votes are. And I've had council members say that, and actually, it's okay. People have a sort of a sense of humor about it, but it allows you to have that heterogeneous set of points. But the wonderful thing about a group that's as large as this is has enough room and enough give to not be derailed by an individual who's, an individual opinion. Boards of county commissioners have a tougher time with that. Most of them in Colorado are 3. And that's really tough duty. I had a conversation with a commissioner in Southern Colorado once who said, we try really hard not to be odd man out because it's hard on the other 2, and once in a while we have to. But I was really impressed with their appreciation for the difficulty of making good decisions when there's only 3 votes. And happily, you've got, a group that's a little larger can actually absorb that amount of difference. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer. Let me hit a few more things. We'll see if there are any other questions. I'm on the top of page 4. Grounds for denial, anything in the code. Inappropriate grounds for denial, failure of an app developer to independently volunteer condition that you couldn't be imposed by the city. I'm going to say no because they're not agreeing to 20 feet. They have the right to 40 feet. It's consistent with the code. But I'm going to say no because they refuse to reduce the density by half. If that density is allowed in the zone district, then it's allowed. Failed motions, when you fail to make a motion to approve, you haven't acted yet. So it's very helpful then to take a motion because normally yours is a recommendation to council. They appreciate your recommendation. So if a motion to approve fails, that hasn't transformed itself into a motion to recommend denial. Somebody on the prevailing side makes the opposite motion. They do that at these Senate committees all the time. They are itching and ready. If a motion doesn't pass, they always take the reverse motion. That's unlike the Board of Adjustment, where if you don't get enough votes, if you don't get the required number of votes, it's automatically a denial. That's true of Board of Adjustment here, but it's not true of Planning Commission. Yeah. Sure, yeah. The motion was, I move to recommend to the city council approval of this rezoning from R1 to R2. And that motion fails. But it fails on let's say a 5-3 vote. There's 5 of you that voted against that. Any one of the 5 of you, and frankly, one of the 3, because there's no rule, you can't change your mind. But one of the 5 of you says, well, I move to recommend denial of the application to the council. And that gets seconded because there were 5 of you that voted against it. So by God, there are at least 5 votes for a denial. If there were 5 votes against an approval, there ought to be 5 votes against a denial. But sometimes the members of the commission need a little help from the chair to say, okay, that motion failed. Are there any other motions? Or you could say that motion failed and you might as well telegraph it to them if it was an approval motion that failed. That motion failed. Is there a motion to recommend denial? Somebody's bound to say, I so move.
So
Right?
if there's
And
8
then you're off to the races, you're done.
if there's 8 members, though, there could be a tie, and then it'd be
It could be a tie.
just be stalled. Because
It could be a tie. I'll say, does the chair always vote? Chair always votes.
so we
Okay.
couldn't.
Yeah, a tie is a motion that does not pass, and so a tie is the same as a failed motion. I've had that happen a few times, and I actually had that in, I think it was Jefferson County, and the attorney on the other side said, well, the county attorney said, well, a failed motion means a recommendation of denial. And I was actually representing the applicant. I think it was one of the few private clients I had. And I said, absolutely not. And I dug up the case law to prove to her that a failed motion on a tie is no recommendation at all. And we took that to the county commissioners, and I think they approved it. But if it's clear you're just going to keep tying, then you're done. You can say, okay, I'm going to declare this agenda item complete. Next agenda item. And then the staff will report to the council. Planning commission, there's tie votes at planning commission. Therefore, there is no planning commission recommendation. It's going to happen once in a blue moon, but it might. So I'm glad you asked.
Do they need to make a motion to deny in that case, or?
Well, I mean, they can try to make a motion to deny, but if it's 4-4 and nobody's gonna waffle, then you can. You have every right, to waffle. But if I would try it, I'd try the second motion. Daniel, if his motion, fails, Patrick can try the opposite motion, but if you keep gridlocking on 4, you're done. You're done. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, well, I highly encourage you to have reasons. If you, to be blunt, if you don't have any, or if the ones you have are, you say, I could make up a reason, but that's goofy, then just say, that's my motion. I'd much rather have reasons on a denial. You've got these blanks in the staff report. But if you can't think of something that kind of passes the straight face test, I'd rather it just be a motion to deny with no reasons, and that's better than reasons that are patently goofy. So, don't overthink it, I guess. If you've got, I'm going to deny it because I'm concerned about the offsite impacts, or I'm concerned about the non-point source pollution here, which the drainage, or the traffic study, whatever, that's fine. But if it just, I can't think of anything, just keep it simple, and you're good. You're good. All right. Let me give a few things on page 4, and we're almost done, I promise. I appreciate your indulgence. Exactions, conditions of approval. What kind of conditions can you impose? Now, I want to make a big distinction between exactions, which are things that the city ends up owning, right? I want more right-of-way. I want park fees. I want an easement for utilities. Those are things the city owns that the developer's actually got to give you after you've exacted that from them. Conditions typically are things that they've got to do, but they end up owning them. Corrections to the plat, landscaping, things like that, well, you have to do it, but the city or you end up owning it. There's not a huge difference, but I want to make that point. Let me make 2 points about these 2 cases. This doesn't come up a lot for you because typically the applications you have don't have a lot of room for exactions and conditions that are, okay, give us a street, because it's already in the application usually. But the kind of outside edge of what you can ask is reflecting these 2 cases, Nolan versus California Coastal Commission and Dolan versus Tigard. In the Nolan case, the Nolans owned a beach house within the side of the California coastline. And as you probably know or don't, the California Coastal Commission, you've got to get the approval from them to do anything within, I think it's 800 feet or 1,600 of the high water line. And that's been true since the 80s. But there was an old beach home that had been there since before that time. The Nolans owned the beach home. They now wanted a bigger beach home. So, but you can't get a beach home permit now within that. It's good for California. They're protecting their coastline. No one's wanted to enlarge the house. California Coastal Commission said, well, we will say yes if you grant a right of an easement on your land above the high water line parallel to the water. And that came up on appeal, and the court said there was no legitimate government interest. There was no connection, no rational connection between what the commission asked for as a condition and the government interest expressed. And here's why. All of us that have driven on Highway 1 up the California coast, and you're trying to get to the water, and there's this line of houses, isn't there? Right? If you're going north, there's a line of houses on your left, and it's like a barrier. And there's only, once you get to a public beach, yes, you can get down to the water, but it's really frustrating. It's all no trespassing all the way up. And the California Coastal Commission could have said, grant us an easement from the highway down to the water. That would have served a governmental purpose, which is to allow public access from a public street down to the water. But instead, they said, well, allow access along the high water line, which, so people could walk on the beach, but people can already walk on the beach because, you don't own all the way out, there's a common law, So the point is that it didn't serve the announced governmental purpose, getting people to the beach, wasn't served by the condition they invented, which is to allow people along the beach. I'd love it if they'd let people to the beach more, because it's frustrated me. I don't know about you, but it's frustrating, where people blocked it off. So we learned that you have to have a rational connection to a governmental interest before you have a connection. Not just because you'd like to have it, but what's the governmental purpose here? And does this legitimately serve it? Florence Dolan owned the A-Boy Plumbing Supply store in Tigard, Oregon, and might still, for all I know. But she did in 1994, and business was good. This is a true case, it's not invented. She wanted to expand the business and needed to go to Tigard for that permit, and Tigard said, okay, we'll let you do that, but we've always wanted the trail along the drainage way behind the store, and so that's our condition, and we're going to impose that condition on you. And she said, well, how's that related to, yes, that's a governmental purpose, probably passes the Nolan case, but it's not at all proportional to the impact on causing. And they said, well, people, with the trail, more people go to your store. How many people go to buy their straight L's which is a plumbing thing? Everyone knows that. Good. On a bicycle? No, they drive their car there. They don't need to get there on the recreational path behind the store. So it's really not at all proportional to the impact. And she won that case. So 2 rules. Make sure there's a governmental purpose that's actually served by the condition you want to have happen, as opposed to just something you'd like to have happen. And number 2, make sure it's proportional to the impact created by the new development. If they had wanted a better parking lot or better runoff control from the existing parking lot, that I think would have been roughly proportional, because if you have more cars, bigger parking lot, that's a real impact from a water quality standpoint, and conditions like a grassed waterway, or these storm scepters, where the drainage goes in and filters out pollutants, that would have worked. So there's that. Let's see what we left. Conditions which are and aren't permitted. Let's go to the next slide, last page. I've said conditions like redirecting traffic patterns. We've actually got a code section on that, and so that's kind of fair game for you. Conditions offered by the applicant, and this often happens. The applicant comes in, and it's rezoning or whatever, but they also bring in a bunch of elevations and pretty pictures of what the building will look like. This is rezoning. We're not doing the building, but they want to sell their project, so this is how it's going to look. And that always frustrates me, because they're letting the public think that that's what's getting voted on. And that's really wrong, because sometimes that's not what gets built. And that's a bad thing. But in any event, they show this and you say, well, you've shown this as a landscape buffer. Is that something you're going to do or willing to do? And they say, yes, it is. That's a condition they've offered. And I think you can make that a condition, despite the fact that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. Conditions which aren't permitted: density, probably height, matters outside of 26. Good, thanks, Jerry, that's helpful. Conditions that don't have a code basis. Conditions which actually redesign the application. The last point I guess I'd make, and it's been a number of years, but I think that at one point there was a council member who was also an engineer, had done a bunch of engineering work on an application. And I respect the fact that this person was a smart person and knew about that. But you're wearing a different hat. You're not the city's engineer. city had engineers that sat right at that table back there, and there was this big dialogue in this room about, well, whose engineering are we going to trust here? And I don't mean to denigrate the council member who was an engineer, but what hat are you wearing? You know, and the hat you're wearing, it says council member, it doesn't say city engineer. And it's a little like the business about when you got a chance to recuse yourself, take advantage and leave the room. You've got a chance not to practice engineering because your job up there is to practice council membering. And so let the staff do their job. You can certainly ask them pointed questions because you are better able to ask those questions. But in the end, you know, this person kind of brought his own engineering to the table and said, well, no, this is what we need to do. And I think that some hats got switched there. And it was a tough patch because it's hard for me to call out a council member in a public meeting. I'm careful not to. And I'm careful not to call you out in a public meeting either because we're all on the same team. So it's tricky for me and very tricky for staff to say, Commissioner so-and-so, can you not do that? You know, so you have to kind of police yourselves, is all I'm saying. Just kind of remember what hat you're wearing. You've been really terrific and spent a half hour more than I meant to keep you here. But what questions didn't we answer? Yeah, Plaza Meeting, yeah. My favorite. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, it was. It's digital now, yeah. Okay, so, you know, for conflicts of interest, which we didn't deal here with, and I don't intend to, I had a similar thing for conflicts of interest, you know, and if you've got a conflict of interest because you are the applicant, I had a planning commission member once in the town of Silverton, Colorado, who was on the commission, and he was also a realtor, and he had a piece of property, and he brought it in for a subdivision application, and his plan was to come around and present the application and then switch hats and go and vote on it. And his name, as it turns out, was Keith. And I said, Keith, and I said, Madam Chair, can we take a short recess? I drug Keith out in the hall and said, Keith, what do you, but that was his plan. It was a very flawed plan, but that was his plan. And so to illustrate conflicts of interest since that time, I've been saying, well, you know, it's, I said, okay, how about what Deep Throat said to Robert Redford in the parking garage, and all the president's men follow the money, remember? But see, no one remembers that now, that movie, because there was, right, Nixon, follow the money, right? No? See, no? So I've had to update it. And the new one is Tom Cruise and Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jerry Maguire in the locker room, show me the money. So that's my new one, but I got to deal with the Plaza meter. I'm not quite sure how to do that. If you all can think of yeah, if you can measure, yeah, likes. Ooh, that's good. He's right. Likes. Ooh, that's good. Oh, that's good. That modernizes me. That's going to be, yeah. Yeah, you're not, yeah, it's not, yeah, we're not counting likes here, folks. That's good for another 10 years at least. Thank you. Thanks for your time, folks. And the last point would be, like I tell City Council, I'm the city's attorney. And so if you have questions, you have the right, and I encourage you, you can call me up, you can email me, you get the email from staff. I respond to those emails. And where I always, in response, usually copy the staff so they're aware of the advice I've given. If it's right before a hearing sometimes, I copy the rest of the commission so that everyone knows what it is that Dahl has said, and not because you're not going to misrepresent what I said, but everyone ought to have that answer. But you're welcome to say, or you call me up or email me. I know the applicant in the following way. Is that a conflict? We didn't deal with conflicts tonight and for another night, but those are questions I'm delighted to take ahead of time. I have the answers for you, and I can give you the pathway that you need and the script if we need to do that. So, thanks very much. You bet, you bet. I'll make the excuse to show up at one of your hearings one of these nights and see how it goes. You know? Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much. Sure, you bet.
All right. Next on our agenda is old business. Do we have any old business?
No, Madam Chair, no old business this evening.
Any new business?
Just a reminder that the next Planning Commission meeting will be on June 13th. It's a special meeting. Please plan to attend. And also a reminder that we do have the city plan, et cetera, open house at the rec center on June 6th, 4:30 to 6:30. So we're not having a meeting that night, but I hope you can come out and show your support at the rec center.
Is the meeting on the 13th, does it start regularly at our regular time at 6:30?
It does, 6:30, yes.
All right. Do we have any updates from commissioners? I see no updates. I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Commissioners, please vote.
Motion approved, 7-0.
Meeting adjourned.